Hey guys, welcome back to the TSU HPSS podcast. I'm your host, Post.
And I'm Shaw, and this is the Post and Shaw Show.
Welcome back to the TSU HPSS podcast. I'm your host, Post
And Shaw.
and we are here with,
Dr. Marissa Edwards-Burrell.
Dr. Mecca Marsh.
and we're going to be talking to them a little bit about what they do in the sports realm. So can you guys introduce yourselves and tell us about what you do?
So my name is Dr. Mecca Marsh, and I'm the CEO and founder of MMarsh Consulting, which is a career coaching, training, and development program, which specifically designed to assist student athletes with their lives after graduation, because that's the ultimate goal. In this particular venue that we're in here right now, we're responsible for logistics for this event. Dr. Burrell.
My name is Dr. Marissa Edwards-Burrell, and I am a health psychology and lifestyle therapist. And here at the summit, I'm working with the students to help them to learn to manage the balance between mental health and NIL. And so helping a lot of these student athletes to figure out, how do I balance athletics, NIL, my mental health, and my social life.
So can you tell us a little bit about why a student athlete should be here at this event, like why it's important?
Absolutely. So the summits that we're presenting focus a lot on the total athlete. So we're talking about their mental, physical, emotional, financial well-being. And so a lot of athletes tend to struggle with that in one capacity or the other. And so a lot of the education and information that we're providing are things that you might not get in other circumstances from coaches or from teachers. And so it's important for them to know.
And from my seat, what ends up happening is we're focusing on the student-athlete side, not athlete-student. And so what are your plans for after? And so as you're planning for the after, what are you doing for right now? Are you going to class, or are you spending 30 hours in a day, which is technically not possible, right? But are you spending all your time on other things? And so wanting to encourage a student to go to class, take your 12 to 15 credit courses. If you have to go to summer school, go to summer school too, because the goal is to graduate within 4 years or 5, depending on, as you know, we got a COVID year now that we can still use. And what does that look like? And then just reminding folks that I went to college for a degree. And what am I going to do with that degree versus the family encouraging him to actually just go to the pros? Because what we have learned is women are taught from a very young age, use this sport to get your degree, and young men are taught, use this sport to get us out. Right. So that's kind of my focus.
Okay, so speaking about that, you are stressing the student before the athlete. What advice would you give student athletes struggling to find their identity in the student aspect outside of the sports that they might end up playing?
Well, you have to also understand that the student has probably playing a sport since 10 or 5 years old. And so we start talking about the grieving process. How do you grieve no longer being a student athlete when you've been doing it for 15 or 20 years? And then once you start the grieving process, then you have to pivot. What is my new purpose? What is my purpose outside of the basketball court, outside of the field? And what does that look like? And so the time in college is preparing, what do you like to do? What makes your heart spark joy? What are those things that make you happy? And then putting things in place with your classes, maybe extracurricular activities, becoming involved in the community. Those are the things that make up who you are. Because if you graduate the same person that you were, then we as higher education professionals have not done our job.
So, side question, were you two student athletes ever?
So I was a basketball player from 5th grade up until college, and then I got injured, and then I too had to start the grieving process of what does that look like afterwards. And my father played a sport. My mother did not, but those were kind of the student athletes in my family.
And for me, I wasn't a student athlete, but I worked a lot with student athletes in the psychology field. So many of the courses that I taught and things along those lines focused on sports psychology, which means that a lot of the mental health and education that we were giving them was also going directly to those athletes.
So how can a student athlete prepare for the transition from being an athlete to life after sports? Like, what are some things that they can do while they're still an athlete?
That's a really good question. I always tell people to start working on identity development really early because a lot of times athletes tend to have their entire identity wrapped up in their sport. So if they get hurt or when their season ends, they tend to struggle with managing that. And so a lot of the things I try to tell people are to learn who you are, what you need, so that those things are able to translate after you graduate. In addition to that, making sure that you're kind of like Dr. Marsh was saying, making sure that you're not only an athlete, so that you're well-rounded and having a lot of good things to come out of that.
I know some athletes' love for the game translates much beyond them playing. So how would you show an athlete or tell an athlete to stay connected in the sports community after they've left?
That's a really good question. I guess number one is understanding there is 360 other degree of things that you can do outside of this. So you've gone from a player, now you can be a coach, you can be a mentor, you can be a referee, you can be in the front of the house, back of the house. There are so many jobs that are more marathon-ish in reference to front of the house or back of the house versus sprint, which is actually participating in the sport. And so helping them to, it's also about exposure. And so exposing themselves through mentoring program, maybe through your alumni at your institution, so they can see life outside and after the sport. But just recognizing you're going to live till you're 90. So then what are those things that sparks joy?
What aspects of being an athlete can be carried over into just day-to-day life?
I think there's so many transferable skills that come with being an athlete. Some of those include excellent communication skills, being able to manage themselves in a team, being able to self-regulate, being able to balance so many things at once. And I think the thing that we don't talk about enough is the amazing benefit of structure that athletes have. Because of their schedules, because of the things that they have to do, especially as student athletes, they have to learn to balance and manage. And so realistically, those are transferable skills that you're able to utilize for work and all these things. I think leadership is another big one. The last thing, I feel like I talk about this a lot when it comes to sports. I believe that people who play sports and athletes are some of the most well-rounded people, and that they're able to navigate and be very resilient. And so I think a lot of those skills tend to translate because they have to get on a field, play to either win or lose, and then get up and do it again the next day. And a lot of people tend to struggle with that. And so I think those are the types of skills that are very, very transferable.
So with this summit and event today, what one speaker and what they talked about, what do you think an athlete should have listened to? If you could pick one, what would be the most valuable?
So one of the things that we work on is in reference to developing this actual summit so that it's not just one, right? And so if you look at, say, for instance, when you make a pie, what's one of y'all's favorite pie? What kind of pie you like?
Apple.
Apple.
I'm not a pie girl.
That's okay. You like sweet potato pie? You like sweet potato pie?
Sweet potato is a no for me. I like sweet potato fries.
Okay, we can unpack that later. So, so something to the effect of basically what happens is we sit down and look at what are the needs and the trends in the current time, and then who do we need to call to come together? Kind of like when you make a pie, right? Who's going to be the eggs? Who's going to be the sugar? Who's going to be the salt? Who's going to be the flour? And all those things. And then so when you bring it together and you mix it, of course, the time and whatever have you, you're going to have the perfect pie or cake. Right? And so when we're talking about NIL, we're talking about mental health, we're talking about the future with Mr. Oben, you just talk about what those things look like. It then prepares you for the athlete today. You can then develop a plan for the future, but then also realizing and not being crushed when your dreams are deferred, and then you have to shift. So those are kind of the things with that. And then I need to introduce you to my grandmama's pie so that you can be like, "Ooh, sweet potato pie it is."
So let's move on to some financial literacy, since U.S. Bank is our biggest sponsor today. How can young athletes stay disciplined with their finances amongst temptation in their environment, and especially when they're coming up on a lump sum that they're not used to?
Those NIL deals, the monetizing of social medias, anything like that.
That's such a good question, and that's something that a lot of people struggle with. We did a summit a couple of months ago, and one of the financial advisors asked what a W-9 was. He was like, raise your hand if you know what a W-9 was. There was a room full of student athletes. It was tax season. A lot of them had really big NIL deals, and no one raised their hands. And so the fact that, we're coming up on tax season, these young athletes have large lump sums of money and disposable income, what they perceive as disposable income, but without the knowledge of what to do with it. I know when I was in college, if I would have got a lump sum of money, I would have went shopping first. And so I can imagine that was probably the case here too. So I think a lot of the things that we talk about here with this financial literacy are things that are you might not have learned before coming to college or before coming to this summit, and maybe mom and dad didn't have financial literacy, so you might not either. And so, I think some of the big things that we learn here are money management, learning how to navigate this new space of what money looks like.
I think the other thing to add to that is we also talk about, stop using your own Social Security number to get paid with these NIL deals. Make up an LLC or something to that effect because you need an EIN, right? And so that's a version of the Social Security for your business. Because when you get your NIL deals, which I learned from one of our summits, is the fact that, that money impacts your financial aid if that's more income coming in, right? And your parents can no longer claim you. So it just kind of, it snowballs. And so we just help people to understand with that. But then also, please don't go home and tell your family how much money you're making and then make your family who has struggled for years feel bad, right? But then also recognizing that you have to pay yourself first, right? You have to take, I think it's 30% out for taxes just in case, because Uncle Sam going to want his cut, right? And then what does that look like? Does that mean that you're at the store right now buying everything for everybody, or you're taking care of yourself and your future self?
So jumping from finances, what role does does a mindset play in the athlete's ability to perform at a high level, going through college, going through high school, going through anything, and navigating life?
That is such a good question. And I'm so excited for that. Honestly, mindset is the number one thing. If you think about the role of your mindset, so in therapy, we talk about the therapeutic approach I utilize is CBT. One of the things we talk about that in that way is the connection of your thoughts, feelings, and your behaviors, and how all of those things are very much connected. And so the thoughts, your mindset is the biggest part, because what happens if you have negative mindset, your actions and behaviors are going to follow suit. And so your mindset, when it comes to high stress, when it comes to having to navigate these wins or these losses, it has to be paramount and it has to be prioritized. And so when we're talking about mindset, it is still a little bit different from talking about your mental health, but your mindset has to be helpful, hopeful, not always positive. Like, we don't have to lean into a toxic positivity all the time, but there does need to be some level of helpful mindset, because you can't navigate these high stress situations without that.
Do you think it's possible that once a student athlete has worked super hard to get this NIL deal, that they suddenly become comfortable now that they've got this amount of money and they feel like, I don't really need to do much else?
Absolutely. And I think that leans itself somewhat into motivation as well, to talk about what is the original motivation for what you're doing, right? So if money is the only motivator, then once I have the money, I no longer have motivation to do anything else. However, if the motivation is money and my financial security and my future and I love my teammates, then I have what's called multiple motivators in order to keep being resilient in that way. So yeah.
I also want to help folks to understand that life is a marathon, not a sprint. And so you can't burn through your money before you turn 30 and literally use that as like a 401k retirement, right? That's just the reality of it. And so understanding that, and the W-9 and that whole piece and banking and all those things, they all go together. But the things you learn as a young person happen as you get older. Because I know people right now in their 40s and their 50s and 60s who don't have the retirement plan, who don't know what a W-9 is, who have just no concept. And so learning that at an early age, then that's one less thing you have to deal with as an adult. But then also you start to shift your generations, and because then you can teach other folks financial wellness.
I know that funds or lacking funds can be a very disappointing, disheartening experience. And can you guys suggest or give any coping mechanisms or strategies that you use or an athlete can use to help bounce themselves back from disappointing financial endeavors?
Absolutely. I think some of the biggest things, I think that goes back to mindset a little bit too, but coping with regard to education, shifting your mindset, recognizing that money does come and go, because I think a lot of people hold, especially in this industry, hold money so high that it then becomes higher than everything else. So when that falls, it feels like our world has bottomed out, but in the reality, it isn't. And so we might need to lean in on education or supports or things like that just to help.
And just to kind of wrap it up, do you guys have any topic that we've talked here, just some advice to give a student athlete, if you could give them one piece of advice each?
My advice is always going to be to seek any support that you need, whether it's mental health support, family support. I am a firm believer in both community and therapy if needed. So because of the high nature of stress that comes along with this isn't something that you can just navigate yourself the same way that you have coaches for your talent. You need to have coaches for your mindset as well. And so I encourage all of my athletes to lean into any supports or any kind of help, especially if they're experiencing any kind of mental health challenges.
Recognize that you might be on a peninsula, but not an island, right? And that's okay. The other challenge that happens as a student athlete is you only have student athlete friends. So find some friends outside your student athlete group. Remember that it's a marathon, not a sprint. And then also every choice you make from this point on will impact the next day. So how do you want to impact the next day? And just enjoy life.
Great. Thank you guys for coming. We really appreciate you. This is it for the TSU HPSS podcast. We hope you guys come back and listen. And thank you again.